Okay guys, so this is video number 2 of how to rewrite your practical assessments. So in the first one, we've dealt with the instructions. So you've now got a marking guide, which has got really clear instructions for the assessor on what the context of the assessment is, what the resources are that they're going to need to roll it out, and what your timeframes are as well. Okay, so you've kind of laid the base work. The assessor knows what they need to explain to the students, what they need to get ready and prepared. Okay, so now that we do this, we're going to go into the nitty gritty, which is you're going to have 2 ways that you're going to then evidence practical criteria. Okay, so your first way is going to be through observations, all right, or your second is going to be through product evidence. Okay, so if, for example, the criteria is as we talked about before, like with the working at heights, it might be that the product evidence is going to be the JSA, all right, that the students are capable of completing a JSA. And then the observations are actually what you're watching them do while they're up on the site, okay? If we look at that coffee barista unit, the product evidence, okay, might be the order form that the student has taken, or it might be a feedback form from the client, okay? And the observations are them actually obviously doing, what they're doing in the sequence that they're doing it in, okay? And then you could have supplemental evidence from each of these in relation to photos or videos or things like that that have been used. So, business unit, I will just quickly touch on business units because business units are a little bit harder with these ones. All right, business units are going to focus much more on this product evidence as we go higher up the chain. So when we look at your Cert 4 diploma, advanced diploma units, it's things like develop and implement a policy, okay? So developing the policy is obviously the product evidence. The policy itself is evidence that they've done it, okay? And then the implementation could be a whole range of things. It could be a training session on how the policy is being implemented. It could be observations or that you've done in the workplace to say, oh, look, we went in and we can see that this policy is being implemented, or we talked to staff and checked to see that the policy was being implemented, or it might be a review meeting that's had in a couple of months' time to look at the pros and cons, or a report that's being developed, and that goes back to product evidence, okay? So the higher up you're going to get, the more you're going to be reliant more on this product evidence. When you're looking at your Cert 2, Cert 3 level, you're going to be focusing much more on this observations. All right. So 2 rules for observations. Do not cut and paste the performance criteria. Okay. Do not do that. It doesn't work. Auditors hate it. It will fail. Okay. And they have to be observable. All right. So I guess one of the things that I want to say, guys, is that when we cut and paste performance criteria, there's generally a lot of things that come up in that that aren't really relevant, or that you were going to cover somewhere else. So a performance criteria might have a knowledge component and a written component to it. A knowledge component and a practical component to it. So it might be student identifies WHS legislation and follows, identifies and follows WHS legislation, okay? The identifies is assessed through your knowledge assessment. The follows is assessed through your practical assessment, okay? You can't just write the student follows WHS assessment, okay? The reason for that is that it's really hard to know what that looks like, because what that looks like in different environments is very different at different levels. So if we take a very generic criteria like that, okay, follows WHS policies and procedures, all right? If we look at that in a working at heights context, it means that the student is going to be completing their JSA, that the student is going to be making sure that they're wearing the correct PPE at all times, that they're going to be, when they ascend the ladder, they make sure that they've got 3 points of contact on the ladder at all times, okay? And that when they're, moving across the area, if there are other individuals up there, that they're communicating appropriately, that they're maintaining contact, with a point at all times and things like that. So those are some of the things that you will actually observe them doing in order to know that they can follow WHS policies. If we look at that from a barista criteria, it will focus probably more on following hygiene policies. So things like if the student takes money, okay, they will wash their hands before they then go and make the coffee. That the student will make sure that before putting new coffee in the coffee grinder, or before putting new coffee into the little thing, that they'll make sure it's washed out. All right, that if the student needs to go to the bathroom, when they return from the bathroom, that they wash their hands. That the student doesn't handle the food directly before they hand it over to the customer. That they don't stick their finger in the cup. These are the sorts of things that you're looking for. These are the observable behaviors. In a workplace context for business, following WHS policies may be things like the student, that they're sitting at their desk with their back straight and things like that, that they report hazards when they see them, that they're using equipment correctly, so that they're not plugging in too many different pieces of technology to a particular PowerPoint. The things that we do in each environment in order to apply WHS are different based on the environment. So we don't want to see something generic like the student follows WHS policies. I can't see that. So what we want to do is you need to write down what you're actually seeing on there and what are some of the quality indicators that they're doing it correctly. So if, for example, I put on my PPE, that's great. I might put on my PPE, but if I've put on the wrong PPE, that's a problem. If I've put on my harness and I haven't checked to make sure that it's tight, that's a problem. If I've put on my harness and it's too tight, that's a problem. If I've, in the hospitality context, if I've gone to the bathroom and then I came back and I decided not to wash my hands, that's a problem. So it's the things that you're physically seeing and the quality indicators that you're looking for that's what we want to see in the criteria. You're setting the benchmarks for what the performance is supposed to look like. What is it? And think about it in context of, okay, if I saw this, I would be really concerned. All right. So as we're talking about the TAE unit, when we say the student creates a practical observation, if the student creates a practical observation and they copy and paste the performance criteria, then that's not a good performance and that's not competent. If they create a, if they create the performance observations and they are observable, highly contextualized criteria, then that's great. That's what we're looking for. So I want to see what you're seeing and I want you to discuss some of the quality benchmarks that you would expect to see. If we're looking at painting a door, we don't want to see runs on the door as an example, okay? It needs to be like long, smooth strokes. If you're changing a tire, you want to make sure that you do everything in sequence and you need to make sure that you check your tire pressures and the tire pressure should be within this range. So it's all of those sorts of quality indicators that you really need to include in there. It needs to be observable. So I want you to go, when you're going through the observations, you need to be asking yourself, is this something I can see? What would it look like? What would it look like from a really good perspective? What would it look like from a really bad perspective? Start with the bad perspective. Like, what would this look like if they were doing it terribly? Because that's actually generally that's really easy for people to identify and go, okay, so they're not doing this, and this. Okay, cool. Let's include some of those things in there and then go, okay, what is the sequence that we need to do it in? Oh, well, they need to do this, and this. Okay, what are some of the key little things that you're going to be looking for? As we said, these are the highly contextualized things. They're generally not included in training packages. So that's the contextualization that you need to be putting into the observation tool. Okay, so you've now got really good instructions which have clear explanation as to what the trainer needs to do. You've got observable criteria which sets your benchmarks. So if you've done all of this so far, guys, you've hit reliability, you've hit fairness, you've hit validity, you're doing really, really well. We'll come back one more time and we'll talk about your product evidence and how you check out your product evidence. Thanks. Bye.